July 2024, and we are heading to Bumping Lake, Washington for a row expedition. And we are going to be hearing from our friend named Tristan Yolton, who has done a lot of research in the Bumping Lake area, and he has captured one of the very best audio clips that we have ever heard. It's one of my absolute favorites. He calls it a chorus, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It sounds like a chorus. So we're going to share a couple audio clips from him with you, and there's also been some prints gathered. Now, in 2022, November of 2022, my dad's cousin went with 11 other men to Bumping Lake to hunt, and they came across some interesting findings that caused them to actually leave. They found some footprints that were way too big to be human, and they also found some odd structures. And also notable is they found a bunch of dead grouse that were sitting up on top of a tree stump that he said was too high for them to reach. It was over 10 feet high. These footprints, they don't have anything in the picture for scale to give you a size for scale, because these guys are not Bigfoot investigators. However, he said that all of them were far too big to be human. And one of them looks like it might even have a sixth toe. We also have a compilation of some stories from fellow researchers that we'll be sharing with you in this film. And you're going to want to stick around to the end, because we have some really special stories from an Army vet that just absolutely blew my mind. Things that have happened to him since his childhood. So I hope you enjoy it, and welcome to Bumping Lake.
My name is Tristan Yolton. I'm from Washington, and I've been researching Sasquatch since 2015, when my father heard two whoops on this hill behind our house in February 2015 while he was taking the trash out. And a few weeks later after that, he told my mother and I about it, and my mother and I went up on this hill, put out a jar of peanut butter and some peanut butter crackers in a wrapper, and I had an old audio recorder, and I strapped that to a stump. And then we went back, and then the next day we went back up there, and the peanut butter jar had finger holes inside at the bottom where the peanut butter was, and we had possible dermal ridges on the side of the peanut butter jar. And the peanut butter wrapper, the peanut butter crackers are all gone, and the wrapper was neatly opened. It wasn't ripped open like maybe a bear would do. It was very neatly opened. And my audio recorder was unharmed visually. There was no scratches or teeth marks on it. But when I took it home and listened to it, apparently after an hour, my mom and I left. Something came in and ate the food, put its hand in the peanut butter jar, and you can hear it. Notice my audio recorder, and it comes over to the audio recorder with this really loud feedback kind of a sound, and it was fumbling and growling while messing with my audio recorder, and you can hear that. So after that event, I got involved with the local Bigfoot group, and we started camping around in various places, including here at Bumping Lake. And here at Rock Camp, I started to put audio recorders up on this hill over here where we're camped. and I started getting speech audio here. We think the Sasquatch are coming down this ridge, this Nelson Ridge here, and we think they're checking us out at the campfire, which is over here. And then a few years later, in July 18th, 2020, my mother and I were at another camp called California Camp, and at 2 in the morning, I had an audio recorder out on my mom's truck, a Tascam, and at 2 in the morning, we had these, what I call the chorus audio, this multiple individuals singing like an opera, like a big chorus. Like there's I think a possible male that starts it off, and then you hear these higher singing voices chime in, like possibly females or juveniles chiming in, and that went on for a half hour straight, constant, no breaks in between. Really, it's just like it just constantly kept going and going. Yeah, we've actually casted some prints at this lake before, and I definitely think they'll use this lake. Absolutely, probably at night, maybe at the early morning hours when people are not around. They probably feel comfortable in doing that. So here we are at Rock Camp. This is a hill that I usually capture my speech audio. There's a big rock shale back here. There's a giant ridge which is called Nelson Ridge, and we think the Sasquatch come down this ridge and check out the campers here. Why were the campers there's a campfire there, so I usually put my audio recorders like right here, right at the top here, and right over here. And also, if I have a parabolic, I'll have the parabolic shooting right up this trail here, up the hill. Oh! I don't know what it is. But it's interesting, and the language sounds like it kind of sounds like a human speaking, but it's in a native language with some utterances, so it's very unique, very distinguished, and there's no English words you can discern.
I know some of you probably have heard me and Shane talking. We've been, since Monday, kind of going off behind California Camp. It's on the table. Okay. Going off behind California Camp and pushing into a big old growth cedar grove that we have found back there. When we got there on Monday, it's the first time we had found it. On our way out, we came around a big downfall cedar, a big root ball, and we get this big crack, and it's right by us. It's some kind of a rock hitting a rock. Shane goes down immediately, hits the deck, because it's so loud and so close. I freeze.
Startled him pretty good.
He asked, "Did you hear that?" And like, "Of course I heard that, Shane. It was right next to us." And so, out of instinct, Shane being a bear hunter, he's, hey bear, because
you don't want to.
Yeah, and then we get
a scared bear.
Crack again, and then Shane turns to me and goes, "You're carrying a gun, right?" I'm like, "No, we just came out here to put audio." And we went out there to put audio, and we just started wandering, looking for prints, and we just kind of got way out there.
And this is an old growth stand, correct?
Yeah, nice old growth cedar stand. So eventually we just kind of walk over, try to find some sticks and poke around, because we had nothing but a Pepsi can and a beer can. And that was not going to do any good.
That's great.
We never found it. We never found the rocks, and we never heard it leave. We never heard any brush break. So whatever was there was still there when we went out, because the ground was full of downfall, full of loud twigs. We went back in on Tuesday. We found a little bit different spot of the old growth cedar. We found a really odd, the tree itself wasn't odd that it was dead and broken, but there was an oddly placed piece of bark on top. It seemed out of place. Maybe it wasn't, but we stopped there and it, kind of examined it, threw it off the ground. Shane started cussing at the Sasquatch and dared him to put it back up. I hear some little rock clacks. Shane didn't hear them, but we keep exploring, eventually get back, and Shane reviews the audio. Rock clacks are there, and then in the distance, there's 3 loud knocks that we didn't hear because the ground was so noisy. It's a doo, 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 and they're deep. So they're in the distance. So again, we go back there on Wednesday. We take Lorenzo with us. He stepped up and went with us. As we're busting through this brush, and this is not an easy place to get to. It's really hard to get there. Shane's busting through, and I'm behind him, and I see what I think is an impression. And I say, Shane, did you step here? Is this you? And he says, yeah, that's me. I'm like, no, I don't think it is. You need to come back and look at this. So he comes back, and he's like, yeah, that's not me. Because this is bigger than my foot, and my foot's bigger than Shane's foot. This is about 15.5 by 6 inches wide.
So Wednesday night, about 8 o'clock, Tristan was over by his truck sitting in his camp chair, and he asked me and Rachel if we had heard a knock. And we did not, because we were talking. We had Disney music playing for Lydia, and we just were talking and catching up. About 8:30, we heard a noise from back behind John Ray's camp. So I went over and asked John if he had heard anything. And he said, no, my ears aren't good anymore. I didn't hear anything. I came back, and I was sitting here, and I saw something walk from John Ray's camp into the woods. 2 steps, 1 Mississippi, it was gone. And the only way I can explain it is that it looked like what you see through a thermal when it's set in black hot. It looked like a Sasquatch, black hot, walking through. That's the only way I can explain it. It almost looked caricature in nature, but it was about 6 foot tall, and it was about 8:45 on Wednesday, August 7th, I think, in the evening. And I struggled with it because I couldn't explain the image that I saw. It had the side profile of a Bigfoot, but the way it looked at that twilight time of the night, it made it look, like I said, caricature. And that was it. It was like a flash, and it was over. So later I contacted John Ray, asked him if he heard anything that night. He said yes, he did hear something around his tent and moving around his tent that night.
2008, I was on an expedition with the BFRO at Bumping Lake, Washington. I want to tell you the story about my sighting and what we learned from it. So during the expedition, one of the families was comprised of 2 gentlemen, and they each had a 12-year-old son. And they were riding their bikes and everything, doing what kids do around the logging roads, around the area all that time. And come Friday night, they went out on a night walk with a lot of the other people that were participating. And when they were coming back to camp late at night, about 11 o'clock, there were supposedly 2 barred owls, one on each side of them, hooting back and forth, going, hoo 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 hoo, ah, blah, blah, blah. So they tried to mimic barred owls, but they really weren't. But the long and short of it is they followed these boys into their camp. And about 1 o'clock in the morning, we're all on the radio, and the fathers of the boys are on the radio saying that they have little Sasquatches running around their cars looking at them and peeking out from behind their cars. And the 2 fathers and 2 sons are sitting on the middle of their picnic table with a lantern watching all this go on. While up a little berm, there was a taller Sasquatch looking over a tarp that had been set up around their bathroom area. So we had adult Sasquatches watching little Sasquatches run around and look at these boys and basically trying to have fun with them. So while this was going on, about 80 yards to the south, I was sitting up high on the berm where the taller Sasquatch was, but only about 80 yards away, as I said. And I'm standing there and I'm listening to all this on the radio. And down the berm, there's a bunch of trees. And so when I was looking down the berm, coming down the trees, there would, behind a tree, there would peek out about 6 feet in height a pair of yellow orangish eyes, and then about 3 feet tall, a pair of green eyes would peek out and then move back. They did this continuously down about 4 trees as they got closer to me. After a while, they went back the same way they came. About 15 minutes after that, I was still looking in the direction of the camp where the boys were, and up from a low depression near the road steps a creature with red glowing eyes, and it looked at me as it was traveling the way it wanted to go, and I was standing in its way. And the creature looks at me for about 2 seconds, and then it turns and then it walks down the logging road that I was standing on. So later the next day, I went back and measured how high the creature was. The eyes were at the same level as a branch that was 9.5 feet off the ground. So that was really cool. So I had a sighting. This creature was black. I couldn't see very many details, but it's a black creature that was blacker than the black around it. There was no moonlight at the time. There was nothing shining on the eyes. The eyes were glowing. And so were the green eyes and orangish yellow eyes that I had seen previously. There was no moonlight out, so there's no light to be reflected. The next night, one of my friends, Mr. Dale Southwick, he had a Russian night vision binoculars with infrared assist on it. And he said he was going to sit with me in the same spot at my camp the next night to see if the same thing would happen. Well, sure enough, about the same time, the same thing started happening. The green eyes and the yellowish orange eyes came down the berm from behind the trees, poking out from behind the trees, and got closer to me. And as they were doing this and as they got closer, Mr. Southwick trained the night vision binoculars on this area, and in order to see better, he hit the infrared assist button on the night vision binoculars. Immediately after he hit the night vision assist, which puts out infrared light, the creatures ran in different directions. We heard about 5 creatures take off from camp. They went down the berm towards the field that we have back there, and then they went the other way through camp. But the second the infrared assist was turned on, all the Sasquatch activity stopped. It was like the electric air that was there when the Sasquatches are there, the balloon burst, and all of a sudden we knew that the Sasquatches had left and they were not coming back. So an important thing we learned, we think the Sasquatches can see the infrared light that's emitted by night vision scopes, cameras, and trail cams. That might be the reason why we don't have a lot of Sasquatches on trail cams, because we think they might be able to see in the infrared spectrum.
as a young kid, I'm looking up at them, and they're right here in the trees. And they were built like, oh my gosh. It was like this group of trees right here, but they were closer together. But it was about 10 feet across. And they were up about 20 feet. And they had boards and logs, or not boards, but logs. I don't even know how they even got them up there. They must have jammed them between the trees. But me and my grandpa are standing there like, what the hell is this? And they were all around us. You know, and there was bones, and there was fish, there was salmon all around us. And Dad's, you know, looking at this, and Grandpa, you know, and I'm just like, I don't know what this is. So Dad actually climbed up a tree and got in one and was looking over the edge saying, hey, I don't, you know, what is this? And Grandpa's yelling at him, get the, you know, get down, just get your ass out of there. We need to leave now. Because I think he kind of knew better. And then Dad climbed down, and then we walked out. But as further out that ledge we walked, there was more and more. There had to have been at least 30 of them in there. And then Grandpa said, yeah, these son of a bitches will be gone in a month and a half. I don't know what that means. I guess the salmon's gone? I don't know. But Grandpa knew what was going on. And he kept pushing us to get out of there. Let's get out of here. Let's get out. And he had his rifle with him, and he had it ready to go. You know, it's like, dude, if we run, you know, let's just get out of here. So we did, and Dad and Grandpa argued for quite a while of what that was. And Grandpa's like, dude, I don't think Grandpa wanted to say. He just said, let's get our asses out of here. Let's just go. We're not supposed to be here. This is something we, you know, he knew what it was, but I think he was trying to put it off to my dad, like, let's just get out of here. Yeah, he said, yeah, they just called them monkeys. That's what my grandpa called them. He always said, them goddamn monkeys. And you could hear them at night. You know, you'd hear them across the river or up on the hillsides just going off, man. And Dad would say, what the hell's going on? And you know, them goddamn monkeys are just chirping, you know, just doing their thing. And I remember laying there in that cabin, listening to that, just, you know, just whatever they were doing. And that's what I was told. If you go to the river, you don't go until it's daylight. And then go down the river. And I did as an 8-year-old. I was down there fishing. I never had any problems. I never heard nothing until at night. And then Grandpa would say, yeah, they're out tonight. Just stay in the cabin. And we'll bring the horses and mules up. And he had a corral right off his cabin that was built kind of in a egg shape. And his bed was right at the window. And like I said, he had his 32 lever action up there. So if anything happened, if they started rustling around, he'd get that off there. And he was ready to shoot it out. He didn't want nothing messing with his horses and mules. So that was my grandpa on my dad's side. Oh, my grandpa on my mom's side? Holy shit, man. Things got really real on this one. They came from Des Moines, Iowa, him and 3 of his brothers. And I'm just going to tell the whole story. They bummed out on a train from Des Moines, Iowa, out to Cascade Locks, Oregon. They got off the train and they walked across the Bridge of the Gods, and they went over to the Hagerwall Mill. As far as I know, there was a mill right there in Stevenson. It's called the Hagerwall Mill. And they got a job, got a place to live. The next day, the first day on the job, my grandpa's second brother was killed. He was killed dead. He was feeding a planer with boards, and the board kicked back, hit him in the chest, and killed him. So my grandpa's third brother stayed there and worked in Hagerwald Mill, paid for my grandpa to take his body back by train back to Des Moines and bury him. And then they buried him, and then coming back, another brother had joined. Anyway, so another brother came back. He was like number 12 of 12 kids. So his brother came back. They kept working there until they got enough money, and then they settled in the Raymond, Hoquiam, Aberdeen area. So and this is during like the 20s, 30s, and somewhere in there. I'm not sure, but anyway, they settled in that area, and they started logging up in the Olympic Peninsula. He said the further they got back into that peninsula, the more and more bad stuff started happening. Okay, so it was, they would go out and work, and they'd have a man camp they would come back to during the day. He said it was all the logs and stuff were pulled by horses, and then it turned into like railroad. You know, they would go in with like small gauge railroad stuff and load the logs on and ship it out. He said there was days that they would go in there, and they had the old 2-man saws where, you know, and then the springboards, they would get up 12 feet above the stump there, or trunk, whatever you want to call it, and they would put their, you know, cuts in and cut the trees down. The further that they got in there, the more problems that they started having. Like, they would go into their work area, these saws would be grabbed and like twisted like pretzels, like twisted all the way around like 2 or 3 times. And these are the old 2-man saws that would, you know, cut the trees down, put their undercuts in and stuff. Or they would find them like grabbed and like bent like this. Like bit in half, like something grabbed it and just threw them all down. So they started having to bring all their equipment out with them. And he said there was one time that they left some axes. There was about 10 axes that when they were done, they would come to an area and they would leave the whips and the axes and all their equipment there. That they went in there, and there was a tree like this one back here, a big one. All those axes were about 45 to 50 feet in the tree, and they were buried in there so hard that they had a climber go up there and he couldn't get them out. They actually had to fall the tree and cut the axes out of the tree when it hit the ground. And they're just like, you know, like, what's going on here? You know, how does that happen? So anyway, they felled the tree, they got the axes out, and then it got to being so bad, the last camp that they pushed out to, which was about 10 miles further, and they were building tracks to, the man camp was getting attacked and the workers were getting attacked. Guys were actually disappearing. The loggers were actually just disappearing. And this is back in the 30s. And so what the company did is they armed everybody with actually 32 special lever action rifles. So they would go out on a perimeter and actually guard the workers. And then at night, they weren't having problems with them at that point, but at night when they were back in the man camp, they were getting attacked. Like, people were still disappearing. Their food stocks were disappearing. And I asked my grandpa at that point, I said, well, did you guys, you know, shoot them out, you know, or like get in a shootout? He said, there's some things you just don't want to talk about. And he wouldn't say any more about that. They were getting attacked at the man camps, and then they armed people, and it got so bad that they made 2-man groups, because even the guys that were armed were disappearing. They would find their rifles and maybe a boot or a hat or whatever. So they armed the second person with the 12-gauge shotgun, and the first one had a lever action rifle, a 32 special. And as far as back as I can get, I think around 1932, the 32 specials came out. I think that's why it's, I don't know. I think that's why it's called the 32 special. But anyway, they would have to guard the loggers during the day, and they would have to guard the man camps at night, and the horses especially, because he said there was one morning they went out and they heard the horses and everything rustling around. Most of them were gone, but they found about 6 of them dead in the corrals, and they'd been like beaten to death. So,
Wow.
yeah, it was like, you know, and kind of looking back on that, I think if you're pushing into my property, I have a feeling that they didn't want them there, and they were fighting back more and more and more. They had problems with the railroad, like railroad cars, because it was a narrow gauge. It wasn't very big. They would find them tipped over, you know, just on their sides, just tipped over. Like they didn't want them going back in there, so they would come in and just tip them over. Gosh. And then my uncle told me one time, my grandpa's brother, he told me one time that they went up to the landing and they had like 18-inch foot tracks that walked up, and they had wooden barrels of water for the horses and the men. So when they come in, they could always get water, and they were always bringing water in. They found these full barrels picked up, and you could tell by the footprints when they walked up there, they were about an inch in the ground. They would pick him up, and they would go about 3 inches in the ground. They would pick up the whole freaking barrel, and they just threw them down over the side of these ravines, and they would find them broke up down there. And he's like, yeah, we didn't know what we were dealing with, you know. Everything I'm telling you, I'm just repeating what I was told.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's a lot that I'm forgetting.
You were a little kid.
Yeah, I was just a little kid. I was about 8 years old, and I was just looking at him like, what? You know? And
Now it's all making sense.
yeah, and now it's starting to come around full circle because, yeah, and then I had my encounter, and I'm just looking at it like, oh my God, man, this is what my grandpa was talking about right here. When he said those goddamn monkeys are back. He said in about a month and a half they'll be gone. And I think what he was talking about was when the salmon are gone, I think they're down there getting fish. And then once that's gone, their food source is gone, I think they move either further up the mountain or wherever they go. I don't know.
The nests like grass? Like were they made out of grass?
No, they were actually made out of tree limbs and boughs like this.
Oh, okay.
And they were about 20 feet up.
Oh.
But they would be built like, gosh, you know, like, yeah, so something like this right here, where there's about 10 feet. So it would be 20 feet up, and there would be, I don't know how they did it. I can remember looking up at them, and they were built within about 4 or 5 trees right here. So they could climb up and just lay in them, I guess. Yeah, I spent 8 years in the Army infantry. I've done a couple tours in Iraq. This happened in, what was it?
2015?
No, it was 2016.
Oh, not long ago then.
No.
8 years ago.
Yeah, it was about like that. So I was in South Central Washington. I was out turkey hunting, and I was on private property. Well, I should back up. The week before it started, I went in and I built me a blind. Okay, and this blind, I should say, when you pull up in there, I'm about 10 miles from any house, and I'm about 7 miles up the road. It's all private property. There's only one road in, one road out. There's nobody that can get in there. And it's all private property. I'm about 7 miles, 5 to 7 miles up the road. I'm probably 10 miles from any house in any direction. We have a couple cabins about 2 miles up the hill from where I had my experience. And I went in there the week before, and I built a blind. And it was, the right-hand side was up against a tree, and it looked like a one-seat outhouse. And I built it out of just limbs and stuff that were laying on the ground with baling wire and everything. Had a door in the back. I had a 5-gallon bucket with a board on it. and I had a shooting port right here. So I was facing directly west. I was looking at Mount Adams. Yeah, so I put a top on it, but I didn't tie the top down. I just put sticks and stuff up on there, and yeah, I mean, it was pretty basic. So anyway, I backed out. Off to my left is Creek right here, and I went up and back down the road to my truck and left. Well, that morning coming up there, it was dark. It was absolutely pitch black. I got up there, and where I parked, it was a landing for a logging outfit. It was just a landing. And off to my left here was about a 250 acre clear cut that was cut off. And that was the first landing. And if you went up the road, straight up the road, about 3/4 of a mile was the second landing. Okay, so it was, yeah, it was about 3/4 of a mile up the road. But if you go up the road, there's a road that turns and goes up to the right, and there's 2 cabins that we have access to. We have friends that own those cabins, and it's about 2 miles above us. But if you go to the second landing and you stop, it's still clear cut it off to the side, but there's creek coming down right there. And if you go down that, the road only goes across the creek and up a little ways and stops. There's a meadow right there, and it's an L-shaped meadow. So when I stopped, I got out. It was dark. I got my shotgun out, my backpack, put it on, and I was loading my shotgun because I cleaned it the night before. And I put my 4th round into it, and I thought, oh, wait a minute. Oh, shit, I forgot my plug. And I put the 5th round in. And I was like, damn it, I forgot to put my plug back in. So I thought, you know what? If I get caught, I'm going to get a ticket anyway. So I just loaded it up with 6 rounds of 3-inch Magnum double-aught buck. So each one of them has like 9 pellets. They're 36 caliber bullets. And that's what I like to shoot out there because it's a lot more open than here. So if you get turkeys that hang up a lot further out, you can reach out and hit them with that. All you need is 1. But anyway, so I just loaded it up with 6 rounds, and I took off walking up this road. Is what I was going to do is walk straight up this road past the road that went up to the cabins, and I was going to drop down off the second landing, cross the creek, and then go up to the other side and then get into my blind. Well, at the last minute, I thought, well, it's dark enough. I don't really want to scare these turkeys and stuff coming out. So I cut up when the road come into view. It's an intersection. I just went up about 100 yards and I cut into the left. I went down to the creek, crossed it, and I came into the back side of my blind. But the thing was, it was just starting to get light out where I could just barely see anything on the ground, and it was nice and wet. It was really quiet. I was super quiet getting in there. When I came up to my blind, I noticed that the top had been taken off of it, and it was laying in front of the door, so I couldn't even open the door. So I'm kind of looking at this like, you know what, how did this happen, you know? So anyway, I picked up the sticks and I put them back up on there, and then I opened the door up and I went inside and I sit down. I put my backpack on the left side and I put my shotgun on the right side. So as I'm sitting there, I'm just kind of waiting for it to get light out, you know, and just kind of dinking around and not making any noise. Freaking mosquitoes. Yeah, I kept hearing something, but I never really thought about it or anything. So as it started getting lighter and lighter, I'm thinking about getting my stuff ready, because the turkeys would come off the hill and come across this meadow, and they'd go down to the creek and get water or whatever they did. And this meadow that I was at, it was an L-shaped meadow. So it went out like this, and it turned to an L shape towards the creek. Along the right side, it was about 60 yards long. This side was about 40 yards long, and then it turned. And it went almost to the creek, and then it stopped. So I'm like, okay, you know, I'm just waiting and waiting for daylight to start. And then I started hearing talking. And I'm like, looking around, you know, I'm sitting in my blind. And I'm waiting for it to get light, and I heard talking. And I'm just like, that sounds like people talking, you know? And I'm like, there's no way. This is one road in, this is private property. I'm 10 miles, I know nobody walked in here, and I'm like, what is going on here, you know? And I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So I actually leaned up and put my head out the blind, and then I figured out it was coming from the front of me to the left. And I sit down and I was like, God damn it, man, there's somebody else in here. This is bullshit, man. They're not supposed to be here. So I was just getting ready to get out of the blind and go over there. I wasn't even going to take my shotgun with me. I was just going to go over there and tell them, hey, y'all need to get out of here because this is private property. And then I happened to look over, and where it turned and went left, I seen something moving, coming across. And I'm like, well, what is this, you know? And then as this thing came out, it wasn't tall trees like this. It was low scrub stuff. And this thing was bent over like this as it came out. And then it stood up like that, right in front of me, about 45 yards in front of me, just to my left. And it was only out about 2 feet out of the trees. And I'm like, I'm looking at this thing like, I have to tell you honest, I was like, what the f am I looking at, you know? Like, holy shit. I didn't know what to do, and I reached over for my shotgun, and I thought, no, don't move. Just get your shit together. Just stay here. Just don't move. Don't move. So I'm looking at it, and it was looking north. I was looking west, and I had a breeze in my face, so I knew. I didn't figure this out till later, but I don't think that's how it smelled me, because I came up the creek and came down, and the wind was in my face. And it was about 7.5 feet tall. It was a big, big guy. And it looked black, but it looked kind of gray at that time. Anyway, I don't know how to explain that one. So anyway, it was looking up on the hillside, never looked at me at all. Just never looked at me. I seen the right side view from here this way. And it was just looking up on the hillside. And then I was like, what is this thing doing, you know? And then it did a merp chirp. And I can't even, I've tried to mimic that, but it was like, I'll try to do my best. It was like a merp chirp, merp chirp. Merchant. But it was loud. It was different than that. Merp chirp is what it sounded like to me. And then it stood there for about, and this whole experience lasted for about 10 minutes at 45 yards. And then it slowly backed up, and it bent down and went back into the trees, and I could see it moving through there. And I'm just like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? You know, like, and I thought, just don't panic, keep your shit together. Just keep it together. So anyway, I'm sitting there for about 2 minutes, and I see movement again, and it came out again, and it did the same thing. It ducked under some trees, came out about the same spot, and it did the same thing. It never moved its arms, it never did anything. It just stood there like this. Never looked at me, didn't look anywhere but straight north, and it was merp chirp, merp chirp, merp chirp. Well, I'm ruining that one because I can't even do what it did, but it stood there for about 2 minutes, and then this arm, I didn't see the arm. It never moved the whole arm. It just went like this. something like that. And then I see movement coming out again. And I'm like, oh, there's two of them. And then this one came out and did the same thing. It ducked down and stood up, and it walked over. And this one was the first one, I think, was about 7.5 feet. This one walked out and was about 6.5 feet. I think it was taller than me. But it walked up to the one that was looking north, but it was facing more like northwest. It was about a 45-degree angle to the one that was standing there, and it didn't do anything. So I'm like, oh, there's two of them. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then, yeah, man, it was crazy, dude. So the next thing that happened was I noticed on this one that it had two black stripes. It was right under its armpits, almost to its back, and it had two black stripes right to here. But I couldn't tell, you know, it had its arms like this as far as I could tell at that point. And then I'm sitting there watching them, and then that one turned just a little bit, not completely 90 degrees to me, but it turned just enough to where I could see this is a female, because I could see her boobs. And I'm like, oh, you know, like, oh. And then it turned just a hair more, but it never did anything. It just stood there. Then I noticed her hands were like this. And then I realized between her boobs, I could see just a little bit of a head sticking out like this. Just a, I mean, I don't know how to say this, but anyway, her boobs were right here, and then the head was like sticking out just a hair where I could see. And I think it was sleeping, but I think it was holding on to her like this. And his legs were around her hips, like a mother would hold a child. And I'm like, oh my God.
Those were the black stripes.
Those were the black stripes, which was its arms holding on like this, and its legs were holding on around her hips right here. And they both looked the same. They looked black, but they looked gray. So I'm sitting there like, I didn't know what to do. I'm like, oh my God, here's a male and a female, and they got a little one. So I decided right there on the spot in my mind, if they took one step at me, I was going to grab my shotgun and I was going to step out the back door, but I was going to keep the shotgun behind that door and say, hello, hello, you know, hello, I'm here. I'm not sure what would have happened at that point, but I was pretty much prepared for that point because I had 2 extra rounds in my pocket. And I'd actually reached in and grabbed him. I had him in my hand. So I had 6 in my shotgun and 2 in my hand. And that was the only thing I probably could have done. But they never looked at me. They never, I don't know, smelled me. They didn't do anything. They never did anything. And then all of a sudden, he just kind of gave a grunt, like, oh. And they both turned and they walked exactly west towards Mount Adams. And they walked across that meadow. And I watched them go up into those trees and disappear. And I sat there for about 5 minutes looking around like, and I wasn't really concerned at that point about them because I figured they were going away from me. But when I got out of that blind, I was looking around because he was obviously calling for somebody. So I went back straight up the hill. I kept that blind between me and them, and I didn't run, but I quickly went up the hill stealthily. I crossed brick, went up on the other side, hit the road, came down, and got my truck, and I left.
So
Yeah, I don't. On my encounter, I don't know if it's on all. I wouldn't say it's all fours, but knees down, arms extended. I felt like it could never really lock in on me. Like it just visually, it could never get a lock on me, but kind of knew the general area of where I was. And once that thing got on the ground, there's a lot I got, but I'm sure there's a lot I missed. Like very agile movements, using body leverage. Once it stood up after, you could see 2/3 is in the upper extremities, but down below, just the way that it moved, turned, repositioned, effortless. Like it was just no problem. And at one point, I remember initially I'm snapping my fingers trying to get Cliff Barrickman's attention. Cliff! And because we had people near us and he couldn't hear me. He was putting stuff back in the truck. But every time I did that, the subject on the ground, it was like, you know, like a dog would get unnerved, or like a smaller animal when it's around people, like it moved and then it would pause, freeze in between, which was the eeriest thing to see in person. And then got into a position where the knees down, stomach perpendicular to the ground. And I remember like this kind of digging motion like this, and then actually got to its side and put a hand up, and I saw all 5 digits on this splayed hand. And didn't figure out till years later, why would it do that? Thermal gives off IR, or picks up IR. It doesn't give it off, right? And years later, we kind of figured out that it was blocking the ambient light from where the guys were and the lanterns were in our camp to be able to discern me head on. I was as close as 32 yards. And I mean, it was just effortless positioning and then getting back up, no problem. I mean, just... There's this old say that people say they move like spiders a little bit, and I understand what they're saying. It's like the locomotion of it, the subtleties is so unique. You know it when you see it. But like I said, there was a lot I missed, but there was a lot I saw. I would love to have been able to get that footage, and I know what the money shot looks like because I've seen it. We just didn't have the technology to record back then like we do now. I press a button, it's SD, you know, back then, okay, SD card, boom, done. And the internal recording, you just press a button, it's over. We didn't have that ability back then, unfortunately. But I know it's attainable because I've seen it.